Welcome to Lingnan Impact. For 10 years, Lingnan Impact have powered sustainable growth in South China's Pearl River Delta. We are open, shared, and inclusive high-end nonprofit service rooted in a Lingnan forum, delivering key services in tech, finance, and ESG through events, lectures, talks, study tours, and expert guidance. Now, for the first time ever, Lingnan Impact teams up with the Lingnan Alumni Association of Toronto to launch a new program in North America. In this episode, Canada's response to tariff challenges, we are unpacking a major development in an international trade that's causing ripples across America and Asia. US President Donald Trump has announced sweeping tariffs targeting Canada, Mexico, and China, set to take effect on the 4th of March this year. The US will impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from Canada and Mexico, while Canadian energy products will face a 10% tariff. Additionally, an extra 10% tariff will be applied to Chinese imports. These measures were initially in effect on the 1st of February, but now moving forward. President Trump has justified these measures are necessary to address the illegal immigration, drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl, and to reduce the US trade deficit. However, the move will spark significant backlash, where Canada has announced a retaliatory tariffs on the $155 billion worth of American goods, with an initial 25% tariff on $30 billion set to begin immediately if the US tariffs proceed. So these tariffs are setting the stage for a potentially dramatic shift in North America trade. To help us to navigate this complex landscape, we are joined by an expert with decades of experience. In this episode, we have Mr. Mark Keeley to join us. He is an expert in governance and public policy who has over 20 years of experience in politics, business, and advocacy. He has advised organizations in Canada and internationally on economic and policy reforms, particularly in healthcare and drug reform. He also served as the Chief of Staff to former Canadian Prime Minister John Turner and as an advisor to former Ontario Premier David Peterson. Mark has also held senior roles across various industries, including General Manager at Atomic Energy Canada Limited, where he led infrastructure projects in Latin America and Europe. He also played a pivotal role in Provincial nuclear reactors in China. With his extensive visits to China throughout his career, he visited China 72 times over the 28 years, giving him a deep understanding of the country. More importantly, his wealth of knowledge of Chinese culture and business practice adds to his credibility when discussing how China and Canada can work together effectively to this matter. Without further ado, welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
I'm very pleased to be here, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay. First off, let's talk about the Canadian business. This is very important. That it's starting from tomorrow. If no more further delay. So, can you share, given your extensive experience in public policy and economic strategy, how do you assess the impact of the 25% tariff imposed by the United States government on the Canadian business and overall economy?
Well, I can tell you from a political perspective, this is massive for Canada. We never expected that the United States, our largest trading partner, our closest ally, from the time that Canada was established back in 1867, the United States and Canada have been inextricably linked. We share a common border. A number of issues in terms of the flow of goods and services between Canada and the United States has always been the most, I'd say, the most dynamic and probably the best served between the two countries. So it really hit us hard when the President of the United States had said he was going to impose a 25% tariff on almost every product and service in Canada, but particularly in some of the major issues that we share trade with. So I can say this: in some cases, we thought we could handle this diplomatically, and there have been excessive envoys to Washington to talk with not only the president, even before he was inaugurated, but also now his Secretary of State, his trade envoys, his ambassador in Ottawa, et cetera, to try to mitigate some of the disastrous impact that a 25% tariff would rain on Canada. Let me just tell you, Nancy, the United States are our single largest trading partner. The trade that goes back and forth is well over $650 billion. So when you think about that amount of money and just what that means for the livelihoods of Canadians, the livelihoods of industry in Canada, and the livelihoods of our relationship between the United States, this has huge impact. We never, and I'll say this, we didn't expect that the president would move so swiftly on this. We kind of don't understand why he would want to do this with Canada when things like our automotive sector are so inextricably linked too. One car goes 6 times across the border between the United States and Canada before it's actually finished. So it makes limited sense from that perspective to have those tariffs impact the automotive sector. But then you look at things like how this will impact on other agreements that we have. And, Canada and the United States have shared a free trade agreement since the late 80s. We now have a tri-nation trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That's something that we should be talking about in this show, and I think we will. But all of this has huge impact right now. Our industries are reeling, and we're looking now to try to measure what the impact will be, and we know that everything starts next week.
Yeah, it's true. While researching for the show, the program, I talked to some business owner in Canada. So one of the business owner hosts 2 facilities, one in Toronto. He manufactures goods sending to US, while he has another factory in California where he ships products from the States to Canada. So, and don't forget, we are having the lowest Canadian dollar to US dollar in 20 years. So, Mark, can you tell us, so they are struggling. So what do you think the Canadian government should take in response to these tariffs to minimize the negative effect on these industry or this business?
Well, there's 2 answers to your question. One is a hypothetical, what I think they should do, and the other is what they are going to do. And I know that the government of Canada has been very clear that they're going to look at the imposition of counter tariffs or dollar for dollar tariffs to match the tariffs between the United States. And there are a number of reasons why that would work, and it sort of sends a message to the United States that we're not going to sit back and take this idly. There are goods and services that Americans want from Canada, and by adding a tariff on those coming into Canada from the United States, it puts a little bit of pressure on Americans. But let's be clear here, Nancy, the United States are 10 times larger in terms of economic power than we are. So, you can't say we're going to match dollar for dollar and expect that things are going to be equal between the United States and Canada. We do recognize that in some cases we have a bit of a trade advantage in terms of trade surplus that we've shared with the United States, and that was basically told to us by President Trump. But look, previous governments have imposed tariffs on Canada, softwood lumber being one of them, where there was an imposition of an added tariff on softwood lumber by the previous administration that measured something in the neighborhood of about 38% on Canadian lumber going into the United States. So those kinds of issues have to be remedied and looked at. But if you were asked me, what should we be doing? I think we've got to be a heck of a lot smarter than putting our eggs just in the American basket to look at that as our largest trading partner. We've got a Trans-Pacific trading partnership between Asia, China, for example, that we should be looking at. We could be looking at triangulating between Asia Pacific and maybe even Latin America and Canada. We've got a relationship already with Europe. We should be exploiting opportunities there. We should be opening up opportunities for us to partner with other countries to look at places where there are growth opportunities. And I look at Southeast Asia and Africa as examples. So, we're not really how do I say, defeated by what the United States administration is doing at this particular point on the imposition of tariffs. And look, I'll say this too, and this is something that I think the world has to recognize. This is the United States, the president of the United States particularly, saying, I want to impose these tariffs not just on Canada and Mexico and China, but on everybody. And if you look at why he wants to do that, that is an isolationist move. And I think it will really impact negatively in the United States in the longer term.
So let's talk about multilateral trade relations. You mentioned about the USMCA, if I got it correctly. So how effective are these trade agreements, like United States, Mexico, Canada agreement? For some audience who know what USMCA is, which is a free trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada. So how these trade agreements to mitigate the impact of such tariffs? Do you see areas for improvements for these areas to better protect Canadian interests?
So let me add some context around that too, Nancy, so people understand. Years ago, Canada, the United States, and Mexico came up with this idea. This was in the early 90s on a North American free trade agreement. So they called it NAFTA. And what it really did was they said, we've got a huge, conspicuous consumer marketplace in those three countries. We have, the United States being the largest conspicuous consumers on planet Earth. We have an opportunity to manufacture in these three countries such that we would avoid countervail and anti-dumping opportunities in North America particularly. So we signed that agreement, and it protected industries in those three countries so that they could manufacture and trade and sell within those three countries without very many problems. But we did see problems, and the reason we saw problems was because Canada has a different currency than the United States than does Mexico. So you saw a fluctuation in prices and the fluctuation in the costs of services and goods or manufacturing of those goods. So there was a bit of a need for all intents and purposes to have that agreement reviewed every now and then. I'll just say this, and one of the things, because when I worked with John Turner, the former Prime Minister of Canada, we had a lot of discussions with the United States on issues of this free trade agreement. And one of the things we realized that the United States, and I say this constantly, the United States would never yield its own sovereignty on trade. And when people understand that, it's almost like it's game over. The United States are always going to, make sure that their leverage is felt on those kinds of agreements. So here we are now. The Trump administration, just after they were elected in 2016, reopened the NAFTA and decided to call it a Canada-USA-Mexico agreement, or CUSMA, or in the United States, it's called the USMCA. But the point of the exercise is it was reopened, and it took advantage of things like our dairy industry. It took advantage of making sure that the automotive sector was a heck of a lot more robust, particularly leveraging off the sovereignty that the United States wanted to ensure was into that mix. And here we are now, almost 8 years later. We're looking at a re-review of the what we'll call NAFTA 3.0, which would be the new and improved Canada-USA-Mexico agreement. I don't know what's going to happen, given that we've got the imposition of these tariffs, but it makes life a heck of a lot more difficult for those three countries to want to work together when you got your largest trading partner who's imposing tariffs on both Mexico and Canada. It's a very difficult scenario for us to operate in.
Yeah, that's true. So you mentioned triangulating or revisit to explore more allies, partners. So what do you think the ongoing trade tensions, such as tariffs, might influence the Canada's current strategy for strengthening trade partnership with countries, in particular in Asia or in Europe?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I'll say this: like let me just look at lumber as an example. In Canada, all of our lumber industry, almost 85% of it, flows down to the United States. I think, and you've got massive growth opportunity happening in Asia, particularly in China. There's a need for wood. And I think, why would we put ourselves in the position to have a 38 plus a 25% extra tariff on top of our wood, when we could be saying, exactly like you had suggested at the outside of your question, to triangulate? It's my premise, and I'm making sure that everybody in Ottawa, everybody in Mexico City, and everybody in Beijing hears me say that I think we should be triangulating Canada, China, and Mexico. And not to say that you have Canada, China, and Mexico so that you could have a greater access to the United States market through that. No, I think Canada has a huge opportunity to leverage its massive trading relationship that it has right now with China, that I think we need to take better advantage of. Both, that's two ways. And frankly, saying we'll protect Canada and Mexico with a relationship with China. And I think there's huge benefit to that, Nancy. And I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense. I'm just thinking lumber being one, but we've got a steel and aluminum industry in Canada that we could really exploit. We have agriculture in Canada that we could really exploit. We've got fisheries in Canada that we could exploit. We've got critical minerals in Canada that we should be collaborating with the world's best country on planet Earth for critical minerals, China. So it makes such perfect sense for us to be doing these kinds of things, so that we're not inextricably and linked, so that these kinds of issues would bite us in the rear end, like we're seeing in the United States right now.
This is very true that with the abundance of natural resources in Canada, we should start already been doing diversify our markets and start making more trade friends. So always trade relationships go hands in hand with international diplomacy. So from a political perspective, how should Canada navigate the challenges in terms of international diplomacy, and how Canada can balance standing firm on trade issues while maintaining a good nations with a long time partners like US? What do you think?
Well, look, that's going to be it's going to be a thin tightrope to walk, especially that we're so inextricably linked to the United States. But they're making it really easy, I'm sorry to say this, for us to look elsewhere for our trade opportunities. And we're always going to be linked to the United States. But you're seeing right now a determined effort on the part of Canada to say, you know what? We're not going to go to Florida for our holidays. We're not going to go to Arizona for our holidays. We're not going to go across the border to get our groceries anymore. We're not going to go to New York City like we used to go. We're not going to go to Vegas, the kinds of things that Canadians did in record numbers. Those kinds of things right now, I keep saying to people, hey, you know what? It's only a 12-hour flight from Vancouver to Beijing. Why don't you go to China for a vacation? You could go to the Weishan Mountains. It's a fantastic place to go and visit. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for exchanges and the kind of long-term cultural benefit that a relationship between, say, China and Canada could yield. It's starting to happen right now in Mexico. You're seeing a lot of Canadians who are saying, forget going to Florida, forget going to Arizona. I'm going to go to Cancun. I'm going to go to Mazatlan. I'm going to go to Mexico City. Those are the kinds of things that are really taking hold right now. But as it relates to trade, I think it behooves us as a country to have a better diplomatic relationship, and we haven't for the past 9 years, Nancy, a better diplomatic relationship with China. And I think we've got to get out of this superiority complex that Canada seems to have politically, that thinks that, we're better than the world. It's not a criticism per se that we have to level at Canada all the time. But I think that the current attitude about the Canadian government needs to change a little bit. I think we need to have, stronger capital P political diplomats in places like Beijing and places like Mexico City, so that they can have access to decision makers in China and Mexico, for example, and not have to worry about only given 22 seconds to present your credentials. We should be looking at, very, very high level diplomatic appointments for places like China, rather than diplomatic appointments based on somebody's bureaucratic career in foreign affairs in Canada. So I'm really confident, and my big mouth is going to be making sure that people in Canada know that we've got to spend and pay a heck of a lot of attention to places like China, who could really, they could benefit from us and we could benefit from them in a better way.
I see. You mentioned say that Canadians are changing their habits or their lifestyle with the U.S. They usually go to U.S. or shop American goods. So the shift in sentiment, do you think the tariff will lead to a longer term shift in for the nation's economic strategy? So what changes should be prioritized to ensure the Canadian business to remain competitive in the global stage? What do you think?
Well, you made a comment a little while ago when you talked about your colleague with whom you were speaking that has not only an industry in Canada but also in the United States, and now they're struggling. So yeah. I think it's almost shameful, to be blunt, that we would use all of our leverage to try to fix what I don't think is going to be in the long term fixed between Canada and the United States. What the United States is saying is, we want to see a shift internationally. Look, I don't think it's all horrible what Donald Trump has done. I think what he's managed to do is say to Europe, for example, we need you to put a heck of a lot more attention on things like NATO, on things like your own agreements between the United States and your countries in Europe. And that's happened almost in the last 5 weeks. When you look at what's happened in Canada in 5 weeks, it's taken us years to whittle away at interprovincial trade barriers, Nancy, and we're doing that now in record time between each of the provinces in Canada. So I still think, too, if you follow along what you're saying, Canadian business, Canadians have to look at a more robust international scope and an international thinking as it relates to issues like trade, and so and trade in a way that it doesn't say we have to compete. I always think that competing is one good thing in a way. It makes drives down prices. It makes quality a cause for good concern and benefit. But I also think collaboration is necessary. I use this as an example. 50 years ago, China said, we're going to invest in critical minerals and the processing of critical minerals. And when you think about that, so that China now, by virtue of that decision 50 years ago, have said, we are going to be the world's presence in the development of electric vehicle batteries. And so when I think about that, how could anybody compete with 50 years of a head start? We should be saying, well, we could collaborate with you. We've got lots and lots of critical minerals here. So does Europe. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to showcase that kind of trade benefit rather than saying we'll compete head on. So let the United States do what they're going to do. Let them say, we're the most resilient place on earth. We're tough. We want to make sure that manufacturing comes back into our country. We want to make sure that we look at what we're going to do. And hey, Nancy, they can hide behind this notion that it's fentanyl and immigration, and those are two very big issues for certain, but they're not the reasons why the United States want to do that. I'm going to say this, and you could mark my words, and maybe this is something on your show that you could say, well, we got an exclusive, compliments of Keeley. The United States, by virtue of what this president will probably do within the next 4 to 5 years, he will announce that they're going to do away in the United States with income tax. And how are they going to make sure that they get that revenue back? Through tariffs. And so people are going to say, my goodness, it's going to cost me more because of what I'm doing in the United States. But guess what? You'll have more money in your pockets because you don't have to pay income tax. That's what I think that this is all about.
I would like to add a remark about my colleagues' situation, and they are worried there will be a long battle with this conflict. So do you think it's a long-term battle? So how this tariff will lead to a longer-term shift in Canada's economic strategy, or what changes should be prioritized to ensure Canadian business can remain competitive to the global stage? Because they are very worried. So they everyday struggle is, should I ship more? Should I manufacture more now? Should I ship out more now? Should I ask my customer to issue more PO? They are concerned. So Mark, what do you think?
Well, look, that's a great question too, and I think that we can't just say, oh, we're going to have to, use diplomatic means to try to fix this. When the tariffs come and businesses are impacted, we're going to be looking to government to help us to wade through that confusion and, frankly, the loss, because you're going to see. And so I've heard right now that in some provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, entire industries could be wiped out by virtue of 25% tariff. So there has to be a robustness on the part of government to help wade through that. And a lot of that, maybe we got to look at it in the context of being a lot more aggressive, a lot more assertive on this idea around triangulation, for example. I think it's a long-term impact, Nancy. We are not going to see this, by the time Donald Trump leaves in 4 years, things are going to go back to normal. No, this has changed now forever. And I think it behooves us, and you're seeing how fast government in Canada is to react to this. So I think that it's fair to say that we could be a heck of a lot more expeditious in terms of how we deal with the longer term impact of this, because we can't wait for things to happen before we react. We have to be very proactive as it stands right now. So that whole idea around triangulation, I think, for example, wood could travel west across the Pacific into Asia. So we don't have to worry about an increased 25% tariff on Canadian wood. Almost 100% of the product that we cut and mill in this country could go other places than the United States. The United States, unfortunately, then could have to wait in line, for example, for new wood products, because it's all going somewhere else. The other way that this could be changed or realigned, if that's the right approach, is on the triangulation, as I had suggested, so that Canada, China, and Mexico are working. The president of Mexico has said she wants to be a bridge to Latin America and to Africa. What better way to actually expand markets than to have the added benefit of a triangulation impact with the robust market and the huge impact of the China market into Mexico for as a bridge to Latin America, as a bridge to Africa. This would fundamentally change the way that trade operates in the world, and it wouldn't rely on us having to be inward thinking, where manufacturing from Mexico goes into the United States and manufacturing in Canada goes into the United States, and the United States says, okay, we'll just have these two proximate trading partners as that big, we could call it that big agreement state between Canada and the United States and Mexico. So it really would behoove us a lot to be looking at those kinds of impactful trade arrangements or trade alignments, like I'm talking about. The triangulation makes perfect sense. I'm seeing things right now in areas like healthcare, agriculture, on even academic interchanges between Canada, the United States, and Canada, China, and Mexico, that would have huge impact as bridges to the places that I was talking about, whether it's Latin America, South America, or Africa, so that those three countries, China, Canada, and Mexico, are leading the charge on that.
I see. The last question. So you're saying a lot of triangulating, collaborative, and when in terms of policy making or in seeking new partners and new allies. So do you expect President Trump will escalate after the tariff? There will any other new moves from him? Or as personally, I can see Canada this time they are not so much prepared. So what should they do to keep in mind for this similar events like this, to navigate these uncertain times? What do you advise them, if you could say to them?
What would I advise the President of the United States?
I would say the first question is, do you expect President Trump will escalate after the tariff to any new measures? The second question is, what do you advise the Canadian policymakers to keep in mind when they navigate these uncertain times or sudden new measures from the international partners?
Well, yeah, I'll answer your question this way. I don't think we have seen this amount of activity in the first month and a half of any president's term since Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s and 40s. We have not seen it so busy like this, and frankly, it's almost. I want to be very careful saying this, but it's hard to gauge just how either eager he is or how serious he is based on the comments he makes. I don't think China doesn't face the United States saying we would like China to be our 51st state. We don't hear him saying to Mexico, we'd like you to be our 51st state, but he's saying to Canada, you're a tiny enough country, an insignificant enough population that you should be our 51st state. You have the population of California. It wouldn't be a bad idea that we did this because here's what we're doing for your country anyway. That kind of talk is really, really unsettling. And I think Canadians are starting to band it together. So what I'm telling you is probably going to get some presence because we can almost say, all right, you continue to do what you're doing, continue to be as controversial as you can be, Mr. President, but we got other things to do. We've got, like you said in your comments, we've got massive amounts of natural resources that we could certainly put to use in other places where there's a manufacturing base, like in China, like in Mexico. And I think that China is watching what's happening in the United States with a heck of a lot of amusement. And I think they're saying too, you know what? Canada, Mexico, maybe it's about time that we do have very interesting discussions on bilateral trade between Asia Pacific, Canada, and Mexico, and leave the United States and Donald Trump in the immediate short term to do what they're doing, and let them figure out in the next dozen or so years the impact of this nonsense.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Mark. So this is the end of the show, and thanks for your time again and your invaluable experience and insights. Thank you very much.
I'm very, very happy to be here, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks for watching. This is Ling Impact.